Okay. He's got the bark collar on. He wants to apologize to everyone. Can you say you're sorry for all the barking and stuff? Look, Coble. Look that way. Look that way. No, okay, don't look that way. Look at me. Oh, there you go. Say you're sorry. This shoves like really sharp knives into his throat every time he barks. It doesn't do that. Okay, be quiet. All right. Okay. So, where I left you was the government spending stuff, study questions number 40 through 51. I went into great detail on this in class. I sent you the PowerPoints, but let's just do it pretty quickly here. Let's see. If the federal government is in deficit, somebody's got to be in surplus. Ooh, let's do it this way. If the federal government's in deficit, ooh, that would be this way, right? Somebody's going to be in, sorry, it's hard to tell, in surplus. Now, so just in the same way, if the U.S. has a trade deficit, somebody's going to have a trade surplus. Well, guess what? We're the non-government sector. The private sector is the non-government sector, right? So when the government is in deficit, we are in surplus. When the government is in surplus, we are in deficit. At the end of the Clinton years, when everybody is breaking their arm, patting themselves on the back for this great government surplus, private sector debt skyrocketed, all right? And it's easy to look up the statistics, and nor is it terribly surprising because it's an accounting identity. If the government taxes more money away than they spend, the private sector loses income, all right? And as I showed you in class, not only was that true, but we also had a trade deficit too. So the private sector was losing money to the government and losing money to China and Japan and OPEC countries and so forth. So that really kind of sucked. And so that's A. B is we need the government to somehow be the balance against the fact that investment will not stay high enough. NPY, Z curve, full employment. There's absolutely no guarantee that the demand curve happens to cut right where full employment is, all right? So wherever it does cut, if it's short, let's say, I'm going to do a different color here. If that's investment right here, then we would want to say sup G right here, all right, to fill the gap. Now, specifically how that's done is going to be covered on exam 3 because there are really good ways to do this part right here and there are really bad ways to do it, and the way we currently do it is a relatively bad way of doing it. But nevertheless, the point being that we need the government spending because we have the ability to produce goods and services for everybody on a scale the likes of which the planet has never seen. But if no one can find anything profitable for you to do, you have to go without the things that we can actually afford to produce. So we have to fill this gap here somewhere. Now, during the Cold War, the Soviets offered us tremendous employment opportunities for, like, my father, who was stuck in West Virginia with no job, so he joined the Air Force. Now, would there have been a need for people to defend London from the Soviets if there hadn't been a Cold War? Well, no. So the Soviets offered this tremendous source of employment, not on purpose, of course, but all through G. So, A, when the government spends in deficit, it shifts the curve up. B, as I told you, it is impossible for the United States of America to default on debt in its own currency, and I showed you quote after quote from Federal Reserve chairs, from academics, from private sector investors. There's one particular guy, Warren Mosler, who is independently wealthy. He now lives on a little island in the Caribbean because he figured out, oh my God, government debt can never be defaulted on if it's in his own currency. So he speculated based on that when everyone was leaning the other way, and he made millions. So, good for him. Now, let's see. Is that all I have to say about government spending? We have more to say about it after exam 1, and I cannot frickin' wait to tell you about it. But I have to. Let's see. Net drain. Yeah, okay, that article's easy enough to read. Okay, so then we got to, and remember, I've done all this before, but without the microphone turned on. I'm checking right now to make sure that the microphone's on. Anyway, so I'm very, very tired. Let's see. Okay, yeah, that's easy enough. All right, let's talk for just a second about endogenous money. And when I say let's talk, what I really mean is, listen to me. All right, as I have shown you a couple of times now, when you think about the money supply and about the financial sector, you really need to think in terms of a balance sheet, or you're not going to understand it. And the example I gave you in class was something like this: T-bills, loans, reserves, checking, borrowing, and net worth. And because I've done this example so many times now, I think I remember my numbers, like 60 million, 160 million, 20 million, 200 million, 10 million, 30 million. Let's check my math. That's going to be, yeah, that's a 1 right there, sorry. 240 million. And that's going to be 240 million. Brilliant, John T. Harvey. All right, so here's the deal. You have to think like this in terms of how the financial sector works. Think in terms of assets and liabilities. This bank has 60 million in treasury bills, which are extremely safe but earn very little return. Here are 160 in loans, which are less safe but earn a better return. Funny how that works. And then here's cash, deposited to the Fed, and it is perfectly safe but earns you nothing. All right. Now, those are all its assets. Its liabilities, you've got your money in the checking account there, but it's yours. You can take it out whenever you want to. Banks borrow money from other banks and from the Federal Reserve and from you. When you open a CD or a savings account, they're borrowing from you. Now, the difference between, imagine this, if they could cash in all 240 million and pay off that 210, what would they have left? 30. So that's the net worth, 30. That turned out to be a very, as you know from lecture, a very important number. Now, next thing I want to remind you of, and again, this is all review so far, is what happens when a bank makes a loan. And that is this, that let's say you come in with this great idea, it's going to cost 10 million, and the banker is really excited about it, because remember, this is the biggest money maker right here. Sure, we'll extend another loan for 10 million. All right, so now I'm from 160 to 170. And we're going to give you the money in a checking account. We're going to give you a checkbook and say you can write checks up to 10 million on that. And they just do that by the stroke of a key. All right, that's all they have to do. The commercial banks are allowed to make up credit, but credit and Federal Reserve money to you and me is indistinguishable, right? So they make up credit. Now, back in the old days, individual banks would make up their own money. It would be like Bank of America dollars or Frost Bank dollars or whatever. Now they're allowed to do it in just American dollars. And also there's the deposit insurance. All right, so anyway, they immediately created money. The money supply went up with no action from the Federal Reserve whatsoever. And the only remaining problem is this. Banks must keep at least 10% of checking in reserve, which is no longer true. It was true when it was 220, but now it needs to be 21, doesn't it? All right, in order to cover this 210, the bank needs 21 over here. Well, here's the deal, though. They don't need to cover that except for on average every 14 days. So if I have somebody come in with this great idea, I'm going to make the loan right now before they walk to another bank and make the deal with them instead. I want you to make your deal with us because I think you're going to pay it back. And this is our big money maker. So I went ahead and made the loan without the reserves. I've got 14 days to figure it out. Furthermore, the first place I'm going to look when I try to figure it out is other banks. I'm short $1 million, but another bank may have $1 million extra. So that's what the federal funds market is about. I will borrow money overnight to cover this shortfall right here. But let's say that the entire banking system is short of cash. I should say it this way. The entire banking system is short of reserves. That would tend to bid up the interest rate. Right? Everyone is competing for these few reserves, for reserves that are insufficient to cover everyone's federal requirement. So they're all bidding for this money. They're driving up interest rates. If I'm the Fed, I'm like, oh my God, I target interest rates. I can't let this happen. So I have to step in and inject new reserves, or the interest rate will move. How do I do that? Hey, I'll buy $1 million worth of treasury bills from you, and then you'll have 59 up here and 21 down here. Everything's covered. All right. So this is related to, well, a number of study questions here where it talks about the fact that the money supply changes even without Federal Reserve policy changes. The Fed targets the price of money. It doesn't target the quantity of money. The quantity of money fluctuates within the private sector. The other thing I was going to mention was that the really key factor here is not the reserves. The reserves are no big deal. The big deal is yes, I hear him too. And I know I have the bark collar on. Who knows what's going on with his life right now. So the ratio of net worth to assets, or the capital asset ratio, because if that number there hits zero, and frankly, if it gets close to zero, the Fed shows up, slaps you in irons, drags you off, and has you shot or something like that. I don't know. So the bank is really worried about that number right there. What happens to this number if somebody defaults on a loan? Well, it goes down. If T-bills are defaulted on, which is not going to happen, but anyway, it goes down. So, and as I told you in class, let's see, Lehman Brothers, their ratio was around 3.5 to 4, the ratio right here, which meant that their assets could only depreciate by 3.5 to 4% before they were insolvent. And I'm going to go close the door again. But let me tell you this. All right. So last night I'm walking him, right, to wear him out so we'll sleep. And we get about halfway around the block, and all of a sudden all he'll do is stare into the shadows of this house. And I pull him a few more houses down, he's just staring into the shadows. And then he won't go any further. And there's some slack in the leash, he just heads home. And on the way home, he never slows down to sniff something, to dig something up. All he's doing is looking back and forth between the houses like there's something going on. Well, as I told Contending Perspectives, I've seen enough horror movies to know that you take the dog's word for it. There's something really bad going down. There's like a serial killer in the shadows, or why is he coming upstairs to do that? I have no idea. Anyway, so as much as I hate him right now, he probably saved my life last night. Okay, so that's all I had to say about that. That was, again, it was all review. Now let me jump to 58, which we also did in class, but again, and I also did a few minutes ago when I videoed this without sound. Now this will be more relevant. The one about, hey, it looks like the money supply goes up before output goes up. I'll bet money supply causes an increase in output. No, that's not the way it works. Because when I, as an entrepreneur, want to borrow more money to build something, that causes the money supply to go up. And then when I build it, output goes up. So really, both of those, the increase in money supply and the increase in output, were both caused by the same thing. That is the entrepreneur's decision to increase output. It's not the money supply causing anything. The money supply doesn't cause anything, right? It's so exhausting that has been driven into people's minds, and it's simply not true. It is a very simplistic Econ 101 explanation that has left out so many important subtleties, and it's become part of our conventional quote-unquote wisdom. It ain't true. All right. Now where I want to get to is... Oh, yeah. The financial sector stuff, I did that the last day of class before we went to break. That was like 64 to 70. Basically, the idea being that in an environment of uncertainty, even though the financial sector can easily create new money, on the other hand, the problem is that it's really hard to decide which firms should get more money. Stock prices are being driven more by... I'm going to go close another door because he's driving me insane. Hang on.